All right, everyone get ready because today we're going deep into ergot alkaloids and this is going to be a wild one, I think.
It is a fascinating topic, and it seems like our listeners have been sending in a lot of material about this. So,
Yeah, you're right. There's been a bunch from our cocktail party chemistry, daily schedule prompts, and also all those factoids from the factoiditos and the factoids.
looks like we have a lot to dive into today.
Yeah, for sure. And ergot alkaloids, I mean, they're these toxins made by a fungus, and somehow they're connected to like all these historical events and even modern medicine. It's kind of crazy.
Well, it is a fascinating story, and to really understand the impact of these compounds, we kind of have to go back in time.
Oh, back in time. Now you've got me interested.
Okay, so imagine Europe in the Middle Ages, and everyone is getting hit with this mysterious illness we now call ergotism.
Mysterious illness. Okay,
Mhm.
so what were the symptoms like?
Well, people were experiencing some truly awful stuff. Gangrene, convulsions, hallucinations. I mean, it was a nightmare.
That's pretty scary.
Mm. And, the cause of all this was that people were eating bread made with rye that was infected with this fungus called Claviceps purpurea.
So this fungus Claviceps purpurea is making ergot alkaloids, and then people eat it and they get poisoned.
Exactly. And these ergotism outbreaks, sometimes they were called St. Anthony's fire, and they were really devastating. I mean, wiping out entire communities,
Yeah.
you know?
It's crazy to think that something as like basic as a fungus
Mhm.
could cause so much trouble. I mean, bread was like the main food back then, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it took centuries to even figure out what was causing it. People thought it was like divine punishment or even witchcraft.
Wait, witchcraft? You mean like the Salem witch trials? I think I've heard about that.
Yeah, some people believe that ergot poisoning could actually explain some of the weird behavior that was seen during the Salem witch trials.
So the fits and hallucinations, all that stuff they said was witchcraft could have just been ergot poisoning.
Exactly. Just imagine a community totally gripped by fear, and then people start having convulsions and hallucinations and even gangrene. It's not hard to see how they thought it was demonic possession or witches.
Yeah, that does make you think about the Salem witch trials differently, doesn't it? It adds a whole new layer of tragedy to it.
It definitely does, and it shows how fear and not understanding something can lead to terrible things happening.
And it shows how important it is to understand the science behind things. I mean, if people back then knew about ergot alkaloids, maybe things would have been different.
You're absolutely right. Knowledge is power, and in this case, it could have saved a lot of lives. But even though people did figure out about ergot and ergotism, that wasn't the end of the story. In fact, that's when it gets really interesting.
Okay, now I'm really hooked.
Yeah.
What happened next with these tiny toxins?
Well, as scientists started studying ergot, they found out that it wasn't just toxic, it also had some strange properties.
Strange, huh? I have a feeling I know where this is going.
Think mind-altering, perception-shifting, reality-bending.
Hallucinations. So we're back to that, are we?
Exactly. And that's where LSD comes in. Lysergic acid diethylamide, one of the most potent hallucinogens ever, and it comes from ergot alkaloids.
Hold on. Are you saying that LSD, the drug that became so famous in the counterculture movement, that comes from the same fungus that caused the ergotism outbreaks?
You got it. It's another example of how nature works. Something can be destructive and also have these huge effects on our consciousness and the way we see the world.
Okay, this is way more interesting than I thought it would be. So how did we get from ergot poisoning to LSD? Was it on purpose or just another accident?
It's a bit of both, actually. Back in the 1930s, this chemist in Switzerland named Albert Hofmann was researching ergot. He was hoping to find new medicines.
So he wasn't trying to make a hallucinogen.
Nope. But you know how it goes. He accidentally ingested some LSD while he was working in the lab.
Okay, I'm picturing him in his lab, beakers bubbling, and then boom, the world melts around him.
Something like that. Hoffman experienced the world's first LSD trip. And he wrote down everything, the perceptual changes, the feeling of time being different, the intense emotions, all of it.
Wow, what a story. So this accident basically started a whole new area of research and cultural exploration. It's amazing how one little molecule from a fungus could change the way we understand the brain and consciousness.
It's pretty amazing. And that's not even the end of it. The discovery of LSD kicked off research into how psychedelics could be used for therapy, and that's something that's still being looked at today.
So we went from medieval plagues to mind-bending experiences to medical breakthroughs. I can see why you said ergot alkaloids have been woven into history.
Oh, yeah, and it's not just history, it's the present and future of medicine, too.
Okay, tell me more. What's the connection to modern medicine?
Well, these compounds are pretty dangerous in their natural form, so scientists have been developing what we call synthetic analogs, basically man-made versions of them.
So they're changing the original recipe to make it safer.
Exactly. They change the structure of the molecule so they can fine-tune the effects, they can get the good parts and reduce the toxic ones. It's like taking a tool that's powerful but hard to use and turning it into a really precise instrument.
Interesting. So what are these new ergot tools being used for?
Oh, lots of things. Treatments for migraines controlling bleeding after childbirth, and they're even looking at them for Parkinson's disease and cancer.
Wow. From something that used to wipe out entire communities.
It is pretty amazing, and it shows how clever scientists are and how dedicated they are to understanding nature and how to use it for good.
But to really understand how these compounds work, we need to get into how they work in the brain.
Right. You got it. So imagine your brain like a huge communication network with billions of neurons constantly sending messages back and forth.
And the messengers are those neurotransmitters, the chemicals that control everything we do.
Exactly. Now imagine that ergot alkaloids sneak in and pretend to be these neurotransmitters, or they block the real ones from doing their job.
So they're like spies messing up the communication system.
Perfect analogy. The way they affect you depends on which neurotransmitter system they mess with. For example, LSD works mainly on serotonin receptors. Those are involved in mood, perception, and consciousness. LSD mimics serotonin or blocks it, and that messes up how we perceive things. That's how it creates those mind-bending effects.
So that's why LSD can make people see things that aren't there or feel like time is moving differently. It's all about serotonin.
Precisely. Other ergot alkaloids target different neurotransmitter systems, which is why they can have such a variety of effects, both good and bad.
It's incredible to think that these little molecules from a fungus can have such a huge impact on the human brain. It really makes you realize how complex and delicate our brains are.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand how they work so we can develop medications that are safe and effective. But there's more to the story than just brains and medicine. Ergot alkaloids have had an impact on culture and art, too.
Oh, no, that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
Okay, well, the psychedelic experiences you get from LSD and other ergot-based hallucinogens have inspired so many artists, musicians, and writers. Some of the most innovative and thought-provoking art in history was probably influenced by these substances.
So we're talking about everything from Salvador Dali's paintings to Jimi Hendrix's music.
Exactly. And their influence goes way beyond just art. They've shaped our understanding of consciousness, spirituality, and what reality even is.
This deep dive has already been a wild ride, and it feels like we've barely scratched the surface. From medieval plagues to psychedelic trips to medical breakthroughs, these tiny toxins have had a huge impact on the world. So, what's next?
Well, I think it's time to look at some of those factoids you mentioned earlier. Those little bits of information can tell us even more about the world of ergot alkaloids.
Awesome. I love those mind-blowing revelations. So what's the first one?
Well, one thing that always gets me is that ergot alkaloids aren't just made by Claviceps purpurea.
Oh, really? So it's not just rye bread we have to worry about.
You got it. While rye is definitely the most well-known host, you can find ergot alkaloids in other grains and even some types of grasses.
So it's more common than we think. Huh. That's a bit creepy.
It does make things a bit more complicated, doesn't it? It shows you how interconnected everything is in nature. But let's look at another interesting factoid. Some researchers think that ergot alkaloids could actually be a way for the fungus to defend itself.
Defend itself?
Oh.
From what? Bakers who want to use it for bread?
Not quite. The idea is that these alkaloids help protect the fungus from insects. It's like a form of chemical warfare.
So these toxins that have caused so much harm to people might just be there to keep little bugs away. That's pretty ironic.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And nature is full of these little surprises and unexpected consequences. And it shows that we need to understand how these compounds work in the environment, not just how they affect us.
All right, what's the next factoid?
This one's more about people. Historically, ergot alkaloids weren't just something people were scared of. They actually used them in traditional medicine.
Really? People actually use these toxins to try to get better. That sounds super dangerous.
It was, and it was easy to get it wrong. But some cultures figured out that if you use the right amount, ergot alkaloids could actually help with certain things.
Do we know what they use them for?
Well, there are records of them using ergot to help women give birth, to control bleeding, and even to treat migraines.
So some of the medicines we use today that are based on ergot, they're based on practices that people were using ages ago.
Exactly. It's amazing how ancient knowledge and modern science sometimes meet like that. But let's not forget how far we've come with developing ergot-based medicines that are much safer and more effective.
Yeah, you're right. We were talking about those synthetic analogs earlier. It's like they're designing new ergot alkaloids specifically for medicine.
That's a great way to think about it. Scientists can now adjust the molecular structure with incredible precision. They're creating these targeted therapies that have fewer side effects.
So we've gone from accidental LSD trips to designer drugs. Pretty
Oh.
amazing.
It is, and it shows you the incredible power of chemistry and how we can use it to develop new drugs. And we've only just begun to explore what's possible. There's so much more to learn and discover.
It makes you wonder what other secrets are hiding in the world of fungi.
I know, right? And that leads us to our last factoid, which is more of a question, really.
A question. I love a good mystery. Tell me more.
Okay, here it is. What if, within all the different ergot alkaloids in those synthetic versions, what if there are still some amazing medicinal properties that we haven't discovered yet?
Wow, that's a really interesting thought. Are we talking about potential cures for diseases we don't even know how to treat yet?
Think about it. New treatments for things like neurological disorders, cancer, even diseases that come with aging. There's so much potential out there, and it's a good reminder that we're still learning about how to use nature's chemistry to our advantage.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. We've learned so much about history, chemistry, medicine, even a little bit of art and philosophy. It's like ergot alkaloids connect all these different areas of knowledge.
They really do. And it shows how important it is to be curious and to approach science with a sense of wonder.
It really makes you realize that even the tiniest organisms can be incredibly important and can help us understand some of the biggest mysteries in the universe.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected places.
Speaking of unexpected things, I'm curious about something. We've talked a lot about the negative side of ergot alkaloids, like those terrible ergotism outbreaks. But are there any positive effects that these compounds can have in their natural form?
That's a great question, and scientists are still trying to figure that out. While we know they can be harmful, there's growing evidence that ergot alkaloids in very specific situations and doses might actually be beneficial for the environment.
Oh, really? Like what?
For example, some studies show that certain ergot alkaloids can actually help plants. They might make plants more resistant to pests, help them absorb nutrients better, or even help them grow faster.
So these toxins that could be so bad for us might actually be good for plants. That's another crazy twist to this story. It seems like we're always finding out something new.
Absolutely. It just goes to show how important it is to look at these compounds in their natural environment and not just in a lab.
It's like they're saying one person's trash is another person's treasure, right? What can poison one organism might help another one thrive.
Exactly. Nature has a way of balancing things out.
So as we dig deeper into the world of ergot alkaloids, it's like we're constantly finding new things and changing our understanding.
That's the exciting part of scientific exploration, right? It's a journey of constantly learning and discovering new things. And often it takes us to places we never expected to go.
Speaking of journeys, can we take a little detour and talk more about how ergot alkaloids have influenced culture? We've mentioned art and music, but I'm curious about their role in literature and stories.
Oh, there are so many stories to tell. Ergot alkaloids, with their mind-altering effects and connections to disease and witchcraft, have found their way into countless narratives throughout history.
Are we talking about stories that are directly about ergot poisoning, or more subtle influences, like themes of madness and altered realities?
Both. There are stories that deal directly with the horrors of ergotism, like a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Some people believe that story was inspired by the author's own experience with a treatment that may have involved ergot.
Wow, that's a bit creepy.
Hmm.
And it makes you wonder how many other stories might have been influenced by ergot, even if it's not obvious.
And then you have stories that explore the darker side of human nature, things like madness and manipulation, which you could see as metaphors for how ergot alkaloids affect the mind.
Can you think of any specific examples?
Well, one classic example is the novel The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. It's a science fiction story, but it has these carnivorous plants taking over the world after a meteor shower blinds most of humanity. It's kind of similar to how ergotism can affect people.
That's interesting, how writers use the fear and mysteries around these substances to create these captivating stories. It shows how these toxins, even in fiction, can be powerful symbols for exploring human weakness, the breakdown of society, and how easily our perception of reality can be shattered.
Exactly. And these themes resonate with people because they tap into our deepest fears and anxieties.
Okay, I'm definitely adding The Day of the Triffids to my reading list. But before we get too lost in books, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into ergot alkaloids. It's been an incredible journey.
It really has. We've gone through the history, the science, the cultural influence, and even talked about what the future might hold.
And we've seen that ergot alkaloids are way more than just toxic compounds from a fungus.
They're proof of how connected nature is, how complex the human brain is, and how powerful scientific exploration can be.
So to our listeners, keep exploring this topic on your own. There's still so much to learn.
And as you do keep an open mind, be ready for the unexpected and never underestimate how powerful nature's chemistry can be.
Now, before we go, I want to get your thoughts on something. Throughout this deep dive, we've seen how scientific discoveries, even those that happen by accident, can have huge and often unintended consequences. What do you think this tells us about science itself? Is it about pushing the limits, even if it means taking risks? Or should we be more cautious, always thinking about what might go wrong?
That's a tough question, and one that scientists and philosophers have been debating for ages. There's no easy answer. I think the story of ergot alkaloids shows us both the importance and the danger of scientific exploration. We need to be bold in our pursuit of knowledge, but we also need to think about what's right and wrong, and the possibility of both good and bad outcomes.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
Absolutely. And it's a balance that we as a society need to constantly reassess as science and technology keep advancing. We have to ask ourselves difficult questions about where to draw the line in scientific research, how to use new technologies responsibly, and what impact our discoveries will have on the world.
It reminds us that scientific progress isn't just about breakthroughs and new inventions. It's also about having thoughtful and ethical conversations about what those advancements mean.
That's right. And those conversations need to include not just scientists, but also policymakers, people who think about ethics in the public.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we challenge you to keep exploring, to question what you think you know, and to join in these important conversations about how science shapes our future. So, we're back and ready to wrap up our exploration of ergot alkaloids.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've covered a lot of ground, from those medieval plagues to cutting-edge medicine and everything in between.
Yeah, it really highlights how these tiny compounds from a simple fungus have managed to have this huge impact on human history and culture, and even our understanding of the terrain.
Absolutely. And it also shows us how science is constantly evolving and uncovering new layers of complexity.
Okay, so before we wrap up completely, I wanted to touch on one more aspect of ergot alkaloids, something we haven't really dug into yet, their connection to the world of mycotoxins.
Oh, yeah. Mycotoxins, they're a fascinating and often kind of scary group of compounds produced by fungi. They play a really important role in how we understand the natural world and how it affects us.
I've always found it interesting that these tiny organisms that we often don't even notice can create substances that are both beneficial and really dangerous.
It speaks to the incredible diversity and complexity of the fungal kingdom, and it just shows how much more research we need to do to really understand what role these compounds play in the environment.
So where do ergot alkaloids fit into this bigger picture of mycotoxins?
Well, they're a prime example of mycotoxins, and they really show the wide range of effects these compounds can have on living things.
And as we've seen, those effects can be devastating, like the ergotism outbreaks we talked about, or they can be potentially helpful, like in the development of new medicines.
Exactly. And that kind of duality is a common theme when you study mycotoxins. The line between poison and medicine can be very blurry.
It's a good reminder that dosage, context, and really careful scientific research are super important when it comes to using these compounds for good.
Absolutely. And it also highlights why it's so important for different areas of science to work together. Mycologists, chemists, pharmacologists, and medical researchers all need to be on the same page.
It sounds like we still have a lot to learn about the world of mycotoxins and how they affect our health, agriculture, and the environment.
Definitely, there's so much potential for new discoveries and innovations. It's a reminder that even the smallest things can hold the keys to unlocking some of nature's biggest secrets.
Well, on that note of unlocking secrets, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey, and I hope our listeners have come away with a new appreciation for just how complex and amazing ergot alkaloids and the world of mycotoxins really are.
To all our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic, delve into the research, and engage in thoughtful conversations about the role fungi play in our world.
And remember to approach this field with curiosity, a sense of wonder, and a healthy respect for the power of nature's chemistry.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and happy exploring, everyone.